"Hoorah, Sarge!" Private McDuffie grunted. Craig hated when people called him Sarge. It made him feel much older than his 23 years. He shook his head and stood, bent over at the waist behind a burnt-out truck in the street. "Moving now, Sergeant Anderson," he said over the radio handset he had affixed to his helmet's chin strap. "Acknowledged," his squad leader replied. "Be safe, Cantrell. We're almost out of this garbage dump. Don't do anything stupid." Craig turned his face toward the other soldier 20 meters away and grinned. Even their teeth were stained from all of the chewing tobacco they'd been ingesting in an effort to maintain a semblance of alertness during the extended operation to clear and capture the insurgent-held city of Fallujah. They were a disgusting bunch. "We won't take any unnecessary risks, Sergeant." He looked back at his 3-man fire team and said, "Okay, let's go." They followed around the truck and sprinted as best as their sore, tired, and filth-ridden bodies would allow them to go. Craig reached the target house first and waited for his men to stack up. An infantry fire team leader was the only person in the U.S. Army who consistently led from the front. His job was to take point on patrols, be the #1 man in the stack, and be the first person who came in contact with the enemy. As such, he'd be the first man through the gate. He loved his job. He pressed his left shoulder against the rough wall. From what he could tell, it was a typical house like they'd seen 100 times in Fallujah over the past few weeks. Brick construction, covered by a thick mud or cement layer. It made going through anywhere except a door or low window impossible. 3 quick taps on his shoulder told him that all 3 of his men were in position. He grunted and dipped his head to spit out the built-up chewing tobacco saliva, his team's unofficial sign to breach. Private McDuffie, a big hulking kid from Alabama, moved around the team to stand directly in front of the gate for a moment, until he repositioned himself to the side. McDuffie swung the large metal battering ram that he held and brought it crashing into the metal gate just above the handle. The noise was deafening on the silent street. Off in the distance, the Marines were in a firefight, but the street that second squad found themselves on was quiet until this moment. As the ram reverberated off the metal, Craig was aware of 2 things before he stepped through the doorway. First, that the door swung to the left. That meant he'd turn right inside, and Specialist Jacobs would go left. The second thing his mind processed as he attacked was that a chorus of Middle Eastern voices called out in surprise and warning to one another. The sounds came from the target house. Then he was through the gate, rifle up, scanning the area in front of him for threats to his men. Kelsey shielded her face against the swirling dirt and grime. She wore heavy-duty goggles to protect her eyes and a bandana over her mouth and nose, but the big helicopter's blades would force sand into every crevice and opening anyway. It was only a matter of how much and where the dust and sand would end up. The medevac bird was bringing in another patient from the meat grinder in Fallujah. She dreaded every one of them that came in. It was heartbreaking to see all of the soldiers and Marines injured, permanently disfigured, and hurting. They were America's finest, in the prime of their young lives, and her job was to help save them. The heavy wheels touched down, and someone behind her shouted, "Go, go, go!" Her stretcher team ran forward, hunched at the waist to avoid a crazy mishap with the rotors if a large gust of wind came through and rocked the helicopter. The doors on the dark green Black Hawk flew open, and she stood next to the bird, waiting for the flight medic to tell them which patient they were taking first. The heat from the engines above burned the back of her neck where her uniform didn't cover her skin, and the overpowering smell of sulfur from the burning fuel assailed her nostrils, making her gag. She pushed the minor inconveniences to the side. She had a job to do, and the boys on this helicopter needed her to focus. Kelsey took a deep breath as the men on the helicopter passed the first stretcher to her, and she slid it along to her teammates. She examined the soldier, praying that she never had to see her boyfriend Craig's face from this vantage point. It wasn't him. It was another young man with a gunshot wound to the stomach. She suppressed the slight feeling of relief that flooded through her system as she gripped the stretcher's wooden handle and immediately felt guilty that she'd been glad it was someone else,